Following the rise of the archaic polis in Athens, I would be amiss if I didn't at least spend one episode on the classical city to talk about it a bit. After all, it is the height of philosophy and culture for the Greeks. It's a big episode and a big thing to talk about, but the easiest way to begin talking about Athens in the classical period is really through its architecture. It's usually even defined by it. In fact, when most of you think of Athens, you're probably immediately drawn to the monumental and sculptural masterpieces there. In the classical period, it had a central city, complete with an agora, so a large marketplace of sorts, which defined its economic and legal identity, as well as a high citadel in the form of the Acropolis, which served the function of defining its religious character. It was surrounded, for the most part, by extensive defensive walls that have their origins in the Bronze Age, which, as I mentioned, were most likely Mycenaean, and they were rebuilt and extended over the centuries. There were, in fact, 3 long walls altogether, but the name Long Walls seems to have been confined to the 2 4.5-mile ones leading from the Piraeus, the famous port city, within the urban district mentioned by Plato in the opening of the Republic, while the wall leading to the Phalerum, the port, was called the Phalerion Wall. The entire circuit of the walls is around 22 miles in length, so it's pretty large. These walls really can't be understated. Not only did they serve defensive purposes, but they also serve a strong ideological one. For the Athenians, as with other policies, the inside of the walls demarcated the civilized world, while everything that existed outside of them was considered to be the wild and the unknown. Found interspersed along these walls are the famous city gates. The majority of these were on the western side, beginning with the Great Diplion, the most frequently used gate of the city. This is the one that led from the inner Kerameikos to the outer Kerameikos, and further down to the Academy. Deeper inside that Kerameikos lay the Sacred Gate, which is famous for being the start point of the sacred road to Eleusis that would be used during mystery processions. Another gate was known as the Knight's Gate, and this was probably between the Hill of Nymphs and the Pnyx, a local hillside inside the city where men would meet for assembly in the democracy. Towards the long western walls lay the Piraean Gate, between the Pnyx and the Museion, leading to the carriage road to the Piraeus. Finally, we have the Meletian Gate, named because it led to the Dema Milite, a further suburb within the city. On the southern side lay the ominously named Gate of the Dead in the neighbourhood of the Museion, and it was named because of its proximity to the cemeteries. The Etonian Gate also seems to have laid to the south of the city and marked the point where the road to the Phalerion began. On the eastern side was the Gate of Theochares, leading to the Lyceum, the famous gymnasium that was dedicated to Apollo Lyceus and eventually became the location for the Peripateic school of Aristotle. The Diomean Gate equally seems to have laid to the east and led to the Gynosagres, the famous temple of Heracles, and the sacred grove that existed just outside the walls. Finally, on the northern side lay the Arcanian Gate, which led to the Arcanae suburbs. Personally, the thing that always strikes me about classical Athens, though, are its roads and amazing processual highways. These vast trackways often connected entire districts with the hinterland and were frequently used for religious and civic processions, such as the Panathenaic festivals coming out of the Diplion Gate. Alongside this, though, the advanced road systems also helped to create an expertly structured city that made use of concentric planning, in which the main parts, such as the Agora and the Bouleuterion, which was the central building of the assembly, could meet in the middle before gradually moving to the residential suburbs closer to the outer walls. A lot of interest has been devoted in recent years to Hippodamus of Miletus, the Greek architect who is now considered to be the father of European urban planning. Born in Miletus and living during the 5th century, Aristotle defined him as the first author who wrote on the theory of government, without any knowledge of practical affairs. He was one of the first to set out plans for how a city should look and function with its various districts, and is largely credited with designing the layout of the Piraeus around 451 BC, which he orchestrated to have wide streets ranging from the central Agora, which was actually called the Hippodamus in his honour. His plans of Greek cities were characterised by order, reason, and regularity, in contrast to the intricacy and confusion common to other cities of the early classical period. He's often seen as the originator of the idea that a town plan might formally embody and clarify a rational social order with well-defined spaces and logical distribution. In fact, the modern city of Manhattan in New York is based on his work. Another really interesting site to talk about, though, during this period, to kind of help contextualise Athens a little bit, is Olynthus, an ancient city in present-day Chalkidiki. Olynthus flourished between 432 BC until its destruction by Philip II of Macedon in 348 BC. It was finally abandoned in 316 and is one of those cities in which we have a very good window into a specific period because it has very little Hellenistic or later era architecture on top of it, meaning the archaeology there is almost unanimously of the classical period because it was never built over. The archaic city appears to have been built under a provincially urban plan and extended throughout the whole South Hill. 2 avenues were found along the eastern and western edges of the hill that intersect with crossing streets. But along the south avenue, shops and smaller houses were found, while the administrative part was located in the northern part of the hill, where the Agora and the Deianiri was found. The classical city was founded on the much larger northern hill and spread out to its eastern slope. Like Athens, it had an Acropolis and old city situated on the southern hill, but as we look to the north, we can see noticeably Hippodamian-style planning. The largest part of the town was excavated across 4 seasons, spanning from 1928 to 1938, and gives us a window into classical urban life. Its plan, when you look at it, looks surprisingly modern. It looks like a regular city today, with 2 large avenues with an amplitude of 7 meters, along with vertical and horizontal streets that divided the urban area into different city blocks. Each one had 10 houses with 2 floors and a paved front yard. While there are certainly larger villas, signalling richer members of the community, in general, the majority of the population lived in very similar style houses, usually having interior patios with hexagonal floor plans to help designate different spaces. The sheer uniformity of Olynthus tells us a lot about what we might call today the Greek middle class. The standard house type appears pretty uniform across the board, except for a small number of rich villas that were excavated in the aristocratic suburb of the city, located on the eastern part of the northern hill, which contains some of the earliest floor mosaics in Greek art. There are, however, still some questions in relation to a lot of things here, mainly around activity use. What kind of activities were done in these homes, and by who? Are these agricultural homesteads, or are they living inside the city? Were there gendered areas specific to men and women? Olynthus is still currently being excavated right now to answer these questions, and a large focus is around textile production zones. If a notably defined area can be found for craft specialisation, it tends towards professionality, which we can then infer a certain type of economic model for, which probably includes the workers having a certain type of public and private life. If they are primarily working out of their homes, we may be looking more at a kind of contractor-based economic model. Either way, what we're seeing here in the classical period is a great level of urban planning, primarily rooted in grid design. Cities will often place the agora in the centre, along with some kind of religious sanctuary that served as a kind of ideological or even city cult. Areas for culture, such as theatres or public assemblies, are oftentimes placed in proximity to the agora. But it's really the main streets that connect the districts where a lot of the main activity takes place, things like shops and services. Naturally, the prime merchandise and storage will often come via the ports or the coasts, which usually specialise in economic activity. So as always, don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you in next week's episode.